The dirty water bucket toppled in the middle of the ballroom. Not again. Dark liquid spread across the white marble floor in front of everyone. The sound echoed among the crystal chandeliers of the Sterling Grand Hotel, turning all eyes in the same direction. 40 people in formal wear stopped what they were doing. What they saw was a young woman in a light blue uniform, on her knees, trying to contain with her hands a mess that was beyond repair. Renata Duval was the first to speak, and she didn't speak softly. "Folks, look at this. She can't even clean a floor properly." The women around her, 4 of them, all in long gowns, jewels around their necks, tiaras in their hair, laughed as if they had been given permission. One covered her mouth, feigning embarrassment. Another didn't even pretend. Marcela didn't lift her face, staying there on her knees, her fingers wet, pulling a cloth from her apron pocket. Her heart pounded, but her eyes were dry. She had learned very early on that crying in front of those who mock is giving ammunition to those already firing. Camila Braganza took 2 steps forward, her slender heel clicking on the wet floor, and leaned in to look at Marcela as one might observe a strange creature at the zoo. "Does this hotel not conduct interviews before hiring?" she asked. "Because, I sincerely, Camila." Renata cut in with that smile of someone who measures every word. "Don't be unfair, poor thing. She's doing her best. The problem is, this is her best." The entire ballroom heard, and the entire ballroom chose a side. No one moved to help. The waiters averted their gaze. A security guard near the door adjusted his earpiece and pretended to be receiving an order. Mr. Borges, the manager, appeared at the end of the corridor, looked at the scene from afar, and instead of doing anything, turned around. He returned to the reception. The problem wasn't his, it was hers. Marcela finished drying the floor, wrung the cloth into the bucket, gathered the mop, the cleaning products, and slowly stood up. She didn't look at any of them, didn't answer, didn't quicken her pace. She walked in a straight line to the service corridor, the same way she had entered at 5 a.m. Spine straight, chin up, hands occupied. And it was exactly this silence that Renata couldn't stand. "Hey!" she called, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Hey, cleaner." Marcela stopped. She didn't turn around, she just stopped. "When you're done cleaning up this mess, you can take care of the second floor bathroom. It smells awful. I think it matches your type of service better." 2 women beside Renata laughed behind their champagne flutes. A man in a gray suit further back shook his head in disapproval but remained silent. No one ever spoke up. Marcela already knew that. Those who disapprove in silence and those who humiliate loudly do the same thing in the end. They leave the person on the ground. She kept walking. She pushed open the service corridor door with her shoulder and disappeared. On the other side of the door, she leaned her back against the cold wall and closed her eyes. Her hands trembled. Not from fear, but from so much swallowed. Because Marcela Esteves had learned to swallow what she felt, with a precision no one should learn at 14. But she learned it the day of her mother's funeral, when Aunt Fatima looked at her in the cemetery and said, "Now you'll have to get used to not being a burden." Since that day, Marcela had swallowed everything, always. She took a deep breath, opened her eyes, and went back to work. The Sterling Grand Hotel ballroom was being prepared for the biggest event the hotel had ever hosted, an international wedding alliance. The Al-Farsi family, one of the most powerful in the Middle East, had chosen the United States to introduce their heir, Rashid Al-Farsi, to a group of potential wives, daughters of bankers, ranch owners, developers. Each represented not only beauty but power, connection, money. The presentation dinner would be the following night, but the candidates had already arrived and had taken over the hotel as if it were their backyard. Marcela knew all this, because it was impossible not to. Over the past 3 days, every employee had received a printed list of rules, forbidden to look guests from the main wing in the eye, forbidden to speak with any member of the Al-Farsi family, forbidden to walk through the corridors between 6 p.m. and 11 p.m. She was invisible, and the hotel insisted she remain so. That afternoon, Marcela was assigned an extra task, cleaning the glass doors of the main ballroom's balcony that overlooked the garden. The space was being decorated for the dinner. White roses and lilies were being arranged on gilded iron arches. The decoration team worked in silence, as if even the air had to ask permission. She entered through the back door with her bucket, mop, and a spray bottle. Head down, as protocol dictated. She began cleaning the glass, wiping in slow movements, trying to make as little noise as possible. That's when she heard different footsteps. They weren't slender heels, nor waiters' shoes. They were firm, spaced steps, with a weight that announced presence before any words. Rashid Al-Farsi entered the ballroom through a door no one expected. He was accompanied by two men, one older, with a grey beard and stern gaze, and another younger, speaking softly on the phone. Rashid wore a dark suit and a white Arab hutra on his head. He walked unhurriedly but with clear direction. He wanted to see the ballroom before anyone else. Marcela froze. Protocol was clear. She shouldn't be there, or if she was, she had to leave immediately without being noticed. She began gathering her supplies, her hands quicker than her body, trying to disappear into the wall. The spray bottle slipped from her fingers and fell onto the marble. The sound was small, but the silence in the ballroom was so vast that it carried across everything. Rashid stopped and looked. Marcela was crouched, picking up the spray bottle. When she felt someone watching, she lifted her face, and there, in those few seconds that should have lasted nothing, something happened that no protocol anticipated. He saw her, not the uniform, not the bucket, not her job. He saw her eyes, dark, firm, with a strength that didn't match that cleaning uniform. And he saw that she didn't avert her gaze, not out of defiance, but because she didn't know how to pretend she didn't exist. The very thing the whole world asked her to disappear was the only thing she couldn't do when someone truly looked. Rashid didn't move. The older man beside him, Nasir, his father, noticed the pause and frowned. The younger man on the phone didn't even notice. 3 seconds, maybe 4. Marcela lowered her eyes, clutched the spray bottle to her chest, grabbed the bucket, and exited through the back door. Quick, silent. Rashid stood still for another moment, then breathed, adjusted his shirt cuff, and continued walking with his father. But something in him had changed. Nasir noticed, because Nasir always noticed. "What was that?" he asked in Arabic. "Nothing," Rashid replied. Nasir didn't press, but he filed it away. That night, Marcela returned home. A rented room at the back of a house in the farthest neighborhood from downtown. It fit a twin bed, a 2-door wardrobe, and an electric hot plate. The bathroom was shared with another tenant. Hot water only until 10 p.m. She heated a mug of coffee, sat on the edge of the bed, and looked at her phone. 3 messages from Aunt Fatima, all about money. None asking how she was. The last one read, "If you don't deposit by Friday, Gilberto won't be able to pay his rent. Then it's your fault." Marcela typed a reply, deleted it. Typed another, deleted it again. In the end, she just sent, "I'll see what I can do." She put her phone on charge, turned off the light, and lay on her back, staring at the dark ceiling. And there, in that silence only those who live alone know, she let out a phrase, almost voiceless. "One day this will change." It wasn't hope. It was stubbornness. At the Sterling Grand Hotel, at the same moment, Rashid opened his suite door and called his assistant, who was waiting in the corridor. "That employee, Marcela Esteves, I want her in the ballroom tomorrow during the dinner." The assistant was speechless. "Sir, she's part of the cleaning staff. Her presence at the event would be—" "I didn't ask if it was appropriate. I asked for it to be done." The assistant bowed slightly and left. And what no one in that hotel knew, not Marcela, not Borges, not Renata, not anyone, was that quiet request would unleash a sequence of events none of them would be able to control. The ballroom that had laughed at her that afternoon still didn't know. The laughter had an expiration date, and that date was tomorrow night. Marcela arrived at the hotel before sunrise. She did this every day, but that morning, a different weight pressed on her chest. She couldn't explain it. It was as if her body already knew something her mind hadn't yet grasped. She swiped her badge at the service entrance, put her bag in her locker in the changing room, and put on the light blue uniform that already knew every curve of her body. In the corridor, she met Miss Zuleika, the cleaning supervisor, a woman of almost 60, who walked with a clipboard under her arm as if it were a shield. "Marcela, I need to talk to you." The tone wasn't good. It was never good when Miss Zuleika called her by her full name. "Mr. Borges called me last night. He said you were seen in the main ballroom while the guest from the presidential suite was circulating." Marcela felt her stomach clench. "I was scheduled to clean the balcony glass, Miss Zuleika. It was on the roster." "I know it was on the roster. The problem is, the schedule was supposed to end at 3. You were still there at 4:15. The decoration was delayed. I had to wait to clean what they messed up." Miss Zuleika looked at her over her glasses. She had a tired look, of someone who had seen much injustice and stopped being surprised. "Marcela, I believe you, but Borges wants someone to blame. And when he wants someone to blame, he doesn't pick those at the top, he picks those at the bottom." Marcela swallowed hard. She knew exactly what that meant. "He's going to fire me." "Not yet, but you're off the main ballroom schedule." From today on, only bathrooms and service corridors. And if any guest complains about you for any reason, he said he won't think twice. Marcella pressed her lips together, nodded. There was nothing to discuss. Those at the bottom don't argue. Those at the bottom obey and hope things don't get worse. She turned her back and went to the bathroom corridor. The day passed slowly. Each hour seemed to have twice as many minutes. Marcella cleaned 6 bathrooms, 3 corridors, and the basement trash area. No one spoke to her. No one looked at her, and she thought for a second that maybe it was better that way, that being invisible was, deep down, a form of protection, because those unseen are not targets. But fate had other plans. At 5 p.m., as Marcella was finishing the last service corridor, Mr. Borges appeared. He walked with quick steps, his face red, his tie crooked. He seemed nervous in a way Marcella had never seen. "Marcella, come with me now." She dropped the mop and followed. She didn't ask anything. When the manager orders, you walk. The why comes later. Borges led her to a small room behind the reception, closed the door, stood, rubbing the back of his neck, as if he had to say something he himself didn't believe. "Listen to me carefully. The Al-Farsi family's assistant came to me last night. He said, the Sheikh, the heir, requested your presence at tonight's dinner." Marcella blinked once, twice. Presence? How? Present in the ballroom. During the candidate presentation dinner. The silence lasted 5 full seconds. "Mr. Borges, I'm a cleaner. I know what you are. And that's exactly what I told the assistant." But he repeated the request. And when the Al-Farsi family asks, it's not a request, it's an order. Marcella felt the floor disappear. Not from joy, but from panic. Because she knew that hotel. She knew those people. She knew how it worked. If she entered that ballroom tonight, in front of those women, in that uniform, she wouldn't be seen as a guest. She'd be seen as a joke. "I'm not going." Borges' eyes widened. "You don't understand. It's not an invitation. If you refuse, the hotel could lose the contract with the Al-Farsi family. And if we lose that contract, I lose my job, and you lose yours too." That's how it worked. Pressure never came cleanly from top to bottom. It came twisted, squeezed, wrapped in a threat that seemed like a favor. Marcella fell silent. Her thoughts went straight to her rented room, to next month's rent, to Aunt Fatima's message demanding money for Gilberto. "What do I do there?" she asked in a low voice. "I don't know." He didn't say. The assistant said, "You are to be present, and that they will provide the attire. That's all I know." Attire? That word fell into the conversation like a stone into a lake. Because if they were changing her clothes, it was because the uniform didn't suit. And if the uniform didn't suit, it was because they wanted her to look like something else. And Marcella didn't want to look like something else. Marcella wanted to be left alone, but she had no choice. At 7 p.m., a woman from the assistant's team appeared in the staff changing room with a bag. Inside was a simple, dark dress, without glitter, without embroidery, low-heeled shoes, no jewelry, no tiara. It was an outfit that said, "You can enter, but don't get confused about who you are." Marcella, dressed in silence, looked at herself in the cracked changing room mirror and almost didn't recognize herself. Not because she was beautiful, but because, for the first time in a long time, she was wearing clothes that weren't for work, and that, for some reason, hurt more than any humiliation. At 8 o'clock sharp, the main ballroom of the Sterling Grand Hotel opened its doors. The place was transformed. Candles, flowers, live music, round tables with white tablecloths and golden cutlery. Every detail screamed money. Everyone in that room had more on their watch than Marcella earned in 5 years of work. She entered through the side door, as instructed. She stood in a corner, near a column, her hands crossed in front of her body, trying to occupy the smallest possible space, trying to breathe without making a sound. The candidates were in the center of the ballroom. Renata Duval, in a red dress that seemed tailor-made to draw attention. Camila Braganza next to her in silver. 2 others Marcella didn't know, but who shone just the same. All laughed, conversed, posed as if they already knew who would win. Nasir Al-Farsi entered first. He greeted the candidates' parents with long, calculated handshakes. Every gesture was business, every smile a contract. Then came Rashid, and the ballroom changed. He entered slowly, with that same presence Marcella had felt the previous afternoon. His attire was the same type, dark with the white gutra, but now, under the chandelier's light, everything about him seemed larger, more defined, more impossible to ignore. Renata adjusted her hair. Camila straightened her posture. The other 2 smiled at the same time, as if they had rehearsed. Rashid greeted Nasir, then the candidate's parents, shook hands firmly, said the right words, looked each person in the eye. Everything perfect, everything on script, until his eyes swept across the ballroom and found the column where Marcella stood. He stopped speaking mid-sentence. The man beside him, an agribusiness magnate, Renata's father, found it strange. "Is everything all right, Sheikh Rashid?" "Yes," he replied, "excuse me," and did something no one in that ballroom expected. He crossed the space between the tables, past Renata without a glance, past Camila without slowing his pace, past the other candidates as if they were part of the decoration, and stopped before Marcella. The silence that fell upon that ballroom was so heavy you could almost hear the candle wicks burning. Marcella lifted her eyes, and there he was, less than a step away, looking at her the same way he had the previous afternoon, as if he saw something no one else there was capable of seeing. "You came?" he said in English, with a clearer accent. "They told me to," she replied, her voice firm but low. "I know," I asked. Marcella felt her face flush, but she didn't avert her gaze. She didn't know why. Perhaps because he was the first person in a long time who spoke to her, looking her in the eyes and not down. "Why?" she asked. Rashid opened his mouth to answer, but he didn't have time because Renata Duval was already 3 steps away, and her voice cut through the air like glass. Wait a moment. I know her." Renata looked from Marcella to her simple dress, from the dress to her flat shoes, from the shoes to her makeup-free face, and then she smiled, a smile that held no joy. "That's the cleaner, the one who spilled the bucket yesterday." The murmur in the ballroom grew like a wave. Camila put her hand to her chest. "It's not possible. What is she doing here?" Renata took another step. "Darling," she said, looking at Rashid with a sharp smile, "I think there's been a misunderstanding. This young woman is not a guest. She cleans the bathrooms." The entire ballroom watched. The waiters stopped serving. The musicians lowered their volume. Nasir, across the ballroom, clenched his jaw, and Marcella did the only thing she knew how to do in front of people who mocked. She took a step back. "Excuse me," she said, almost voiceless. "I shouldn't be here." She turned and began to walk towards the side door. Rashid saw her retreating, saw the ballroom's satisfied faces, saw Renata with that victorious smile, saw his father with crossed arms, waiting for him to return to the script, and made a decision that would cost much more than he imagined at that moment. "Wait." Marcella stopped, but didn't turn around. "I asked you to be here," Rashid said, loud enough for every person in that ballroom to hear. "And if anyone at this dinner has a problem with that, the problem is not hers, it's with me." The silence that followed was different from the first. The first was of surprise. This one was of shock. Renata's smile vanished. Camila's eyes widened. Nasir took a step towards his son, but his assistant held his arm. And Marcella, still with her back turned, still stopped, still holding everything she felt inside her chest, felt something she hadn't felt since she was a child. Someone had stood by her side. But she didn't turn around, didn't thank him, didn't smile, because Marcella knew something Rashid didn't yet. In that world, when someone stands by your side in front of everyone, it's not you who pays the price. It's the one who stood by you. And the price Rashid would pay for that sentence began to be charged at that exact second in the icy gaze of Nasir al-Farsi, which crossed the entire ballroom until it met his son's eyes. The look of a father who does not forgive disobedience. Nasir al-Farsi didn't shout. He never shouted. Men like him don't need to raise their voices to make the whole world fall silent. His tone was enough. And that night, inside the presidential suite, his tone was the most dangerous Rashid had ever heard. "Tell me I misunderstood." Rashid stood by the window, still in his dinner attire. He hadn't sat down since coming up from the ballroom. He knew what was coming. He knew it from the moment his eyes met his father's across the tables. "You didn't misunderstand, father." Nasir clasped his hands behind his back, walked to the table, stopped, turned his body towards his son. 4 families came all this way. 4 brought their daughters, brought proposals, brought alliances that took months to build. And you, in front of all of them, ignored every one of those women to defend a cleaning employee. "I didn't ignore anyone. I said she was there because I asked her to be. And that's exactly what worries me." The silence between them was so sharp it cut. Nasir approached. When he spoke again, his voice was low, almost a whisper, but each word weighed like lead. "Rashid, I gave you freedom your entire life. I let you study abroad, travel, choose your path. But that freedom has a limit, and that limit is the name of our family. You will not stain that name because of a whim for one night." "It's not a whim." "Then what is it?" Rashid looked at his father and, for the first time in that conversation, didn't answer immediately. Because the truth was, he didn't have an answer either. He couldn't explain what he had felt looking at Marcela. It wasn't passion. It was too soon for that. It was something else. It was as if in the midst of a ballroom full of people trying to seem like something, she was the only one who simply was. "Give me time," Rashid said. "Time for what?" "To understand." Nasir shook his head slowly, like someone hearing an answer he already expected and had already decided to ignore. "You have until the closing dinner, 3 days. After that, either you choose among the candidates, or I choose for you." He left the suite without waiting for a reply. The door closed with a dry sound that echoed in the empty room. Rashid stood still, looking at the closed door. 3 days was all he had. That same night, 3 floors below, Mr. Borges made a call. It wasn't to the Al-Farsi family's assistant. It was to the hotel owner, a man Marcela had never seen and probably never would. The conversation lasted less than 4 minutes, and when Borges hung up, he already had the order. The next morning, Marcela swiped her badge at the service entrance, as she did every day. The green light didn't come on. She swiped again. Nothing. She tried a third time, her heart already clenching. "Marcela." A voice came from behind. It was Miss Zuleika, and her face said everything before her mouth opened. "Come with me." They went to the small room behind the reception, the same room where Borges had summoned Marcela for dinner less than 24 hours before. But now, sitting behind the desk, Borges had a different face. It wasn't yesterday's nervous face. It was the face of someone who had already made a decision and only needed to communicate it. "Marcela, the hotel received a formal complaint from one of the premium wing guests. They said a cleaning employee caused embarrassment during last night's dinner." Marcela felt the air leave her lungs. "Embarrassment?" "I stayed in a corner. I didn't speak to anyone. I didn't do anything. The complaint didn't come from the main guest. It came from the family of one of the candidates, Renata." Marcela didn't need to ask. She knew. Based on that complaint and the incident from the previous day, Borges continued without looking her in the eye. "The hotel management has decided to terminate your contract. As of today, you can collect your belongings from the changing room. Your settlement will be deposited into your account within 10 business days." The world stopped. Marcela stared at Borges as if he had spoken in another language. Miss Zuleika, by the door, looked down at the floor. She didn't agree, but she wouldn't speak because Miss Zuleika also had bills to pay. "Mr. Borges," Marcela said, and her voice came out firm in a way that surprised even herself. "You ordered me to go to the dinner. You said if I didn't go, the hotel would lose the contract. I went because you ordered me." Borges adjusted his tie. "The decision is not mine, Marcela. It's from management. But you could have explained that to management." "I explained what needed to be explained." "A lie." Marcela saw the lie in his eyes like someone reading a sign on the road. Borges hadn't explained anything. Borges had done what he always did, protected himself and shifted the burden onto someone who couldn't fight back. Marcela stood up from the chair. She didn't shout, didn't cry, didn't beg. "Okay," she just said. She went to the changing room, opened her locker, took out her bag, a mug she kept there, a light jacket for cold nights. She looked at the blue uniform hanging on the hook, ran her hand slowly over the fabric, like someone saying goodbye to something that never loved her but was the only thing she had. She left the uniform on the hook, closed the locker, and left through the service door, the same one she had entered every morning for 2 years and 4 months. Outside, the sun was strong, and Marcela was unemployed. Her phone rang in her pocket. "Aunt Fatima," Marcela answered. She didn't know why. Perhaps out of habit. Perhaps because when everything collapses, you do things automatically. "Marcela, Gilberto is here complaining you haven't deposited the money. He's furious. I can't handle this alone. And I just lost my job." The silence on the other end lasted 2 seconds. Marcela thought for a moment that perhaps her aunt would say something comforting, that maybe this was the moment Aunt Fatima would remember. Marcela was her niece, her sister's daughter, blood of her blood. And now, what about Gilberto's situation? Marcela took the phone from her ear, looked at the screen, at the name Aunt Fatima glowing there, and hung up without answering, without arguing, without crying. She hung up and put the phone in her pocket and walked. She walked aimlessly, without destination, without a plan. She passed the bus stop, where she caught transportation every day. She passed the bakery where she bought bread on her way home from her shift. She passed everything she knew, and everything seemed different, because now she was no longer part of any of it. At the hotel, the news of Marcela's dismissal spread among the staff in less than an hour. Miss Zuleika told a colleague, who told another, who told the cook, who mentioned it to the premium wing waiter, and the premium wing waiter, inadvertently, commented near someone who shouldn't have heard. Yasmin Al-Farsi was having tea in the inner garden when she overheard two employees talking behind the hedge. They fired the girl, the cleaner the Sheikh called to dinner. Poor thing, she didn't even do anything, but Renata's family complained, and the hotel obeyed. Yasmin didn't move. She continued to hold her cup with both hands, her eyes fixed on the white roses in the garden. She said nothing, but she heard every word and stored it away. When Rashid came down for lunch and asked his assistant if he could speak with Marcela, the answer came curtly. "The employee was let go this morning, sir." Rashid stopped walking in the middle of the corridor. Let go? Fired? There was a formal complaint from one of the participating families. Rashid felt the blood rush, not to his face, but to his chest, to that place where anger mixes with guilt, because he knew it was his fault. He had asked her to go to dinner. He had exposed her. He had defended her in front of everyone, and he thought that was enough. But it wasn't, because defending someone in public and not having the power to truly protect them is like shining a light on a person in the middle of a firing range. "Where is she?" he asked. "We don't know, sir. She left the hotel this morning." Rashid turned his back and went back upstairs to his suite. On the way, he passed Renata Duval on the second floor. She smiled at him, a wide, satisfied smile, of someone who had won a battle without dirtying her hands. Rashid walked past her without a word, without a glance, without slowing his pace. And Renata, for the first time, felt a coldness in her stomach, because that silence was not indifference, it was a decision. In his room, Rashid closed the door and called the person he hadn't called in months. The phone rang 3 times. "Mother?" Yasmin answered with her usual calm. "I already know, my son. I already know." Marcela didn't sleep. She lay with open eyes all night, staring at the dark ceiling of her room, listening to the street noises that never stopped. Dogs barking, motorcycles passing, the neighbor's television. Her body was tired, but her mind wouldn't let her rest. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Borges's face saying, "Management has decided to terminate your contract," as if he were talking about the weather. 2 years and 4 months was what she had given that hotel. 2,000 plus mornings waking before the sun, taking 2 buses, arriving with cold hands, and her entire body ready to work. And all of that was erased in 4 minutes inside a windowless room. When the first light of day streamed through the crack in the curtain, Marcela got up, drank black coffee without sugar, because the sugar had run out 3 days before, and she was waiting for her paycheck to buy more. A paycheck that would now take 10 business days, if it came. She sat on the edge of the bed with her phone in her hand, and did the math she didn't want to do. Room rent, due in 20 days. Bus fare to look for a job. She needed at least enough for 2 weeks of round trips. Food. She had rice for about 4 more days. Beans for 3. After that, nothing. Her phone vibrated. Message from Gilberto. "Cousin, my mom said, you lost your job. If you need help, let me know." Marcela read it twice, almost laughed. Not from joy, but from astonishment, because Gilberto had never offered help for anything in his life. Gilberto was Aunt Fatima's son, who lived off his mother, who never held a job for more than 4 months, who lived asking for money and never paid it back, and now he was offering help. The second message came immediately after. "By the way, Mom wants to know if you can advance at least half of this month's amount. She's counting on it." That was it. The help was the bait. The hook was the usual money. Marcela put her phone away without replying, got up, washed her face, tied her hair back, and left. She walked to downtown. 40 minutes of walking because she didn't want to spend money on bus fare. She went into 3 restaurants, a laundry, and a small grocery store. In all of them, the same question. "Are you hiring?" In all of them, the same answer. "Leave your number, and we'll call you." No one would call. Marcela knew. That phrase was the polite way of saying no. At the 4th place, a bakery with peeling walls and the smell of burnt bread. The owner looked her up and down and asked, "What's your experience?" "Cleaning. 2 years at a big hotel." "Why did you leave?" Marcela opened her mouth, closed it. Because the truth was impossible to explain without sounding crazy. "Staff cutbacks," she said. The owner scratched his head. "I can pay you minimum wage a month, 6 a.m. to 2 p.m. Cleaning, helping at the counter when needed, and helping close up at night when my wife can't come in." It was less than she earned at the hotel. Much less. But less was better than nothing. When do I start? Tomorrow, if you want. Marcela shook his hand and left the bakery with something that wasn't exactly relief, but at least lifted a weight from her chest for a few hours. She had a bad, cramped job, but she had one. On her way back home, she passed a newsstand and saw a photo of the Sterling Grand Hotel on the cover of a gossip magazine with the headline, "Middle Eastern Royal Family Chooses Brazilian Bride. See the candidates." Below were 4 small photos, Renata, Camila, and 2 other women Marcela didn't know. All smiling, all shining. Marcela looked for 3 seconds, turned her face, and kept walking. That life wasn't hers. It never was. At the hotel, the situation was different. Rashid had spent the entire morning in his room, refusing coffee, lunch, and 2 meetings with family representatives. Nasir sent his assistant to knock on the door 3 times. On the 3rd, Rashid opened. "Tell my father I'll come down when I'm ready." "Sir, the closing dinner is tomorrow night. Your father is asking that I heard. I'll come down when I'm ready." The door closed. Rashid sat back on the edge of the bed. His phone was open on a search screen. He had asked the assistant for Marcela's full name. He had asked for the address listed in the hotel records. He had asked for her phone number. The assistant brought everything, but also a warning. "Sir, with all due respect, any contact with this employee right now could be interpreted as provocation by the families who are here. Your father is already at his limit." Rashid knew. He knew that every step in that direction was a step against everything his father had built, against alliances, against traditions, against the Al-Farsi name. And he also knew that Marcela hadn't asked for any of this. She hadn't asked to be called to dinner, hadn't asked to be seen, hadn't asked to be defended. She asked for nothing and still lost everything. And that's what he couldn't get out of his head. At lunchtime, Yasmin knocked on her son's door. She didn't send the assistant. She came personally. Rashid opened on the first knock. "May I come in?" He made space. Yasmin entered slowly, with her way of filling a room without making a sound. She sat in the armchair by the window. She said nothing for almost a minute. She just sat there, present, as if her presence was enough to say, "I'm on your side, but I need to understand." "Tell me," she said, in Arabic. "You already know. I know what others say. I want to hear it from you." Rashid leaned against the wall and crossed his arms. I looked at her and saw someone real, mother. In the middle of an entire ballroom of people pretending, she was the only one who wasn't acting. And when they humiliated her in front of me, I couldn't stay silent. It wasn't strategy. It wasn't a whim. I simply couldn't. Yasmin listened, didn't interrupt, didn't judge. "And what do you want to do now?" she asked. "I want to find her. I want to at least apologize, because I caused all of this." Yasmin was silent for another moment. Then she spoke with a firm but gentle voice. "Rashid, your father set a deadline. Tomorrow night is the closing dinner. If you don't choose, he chooses for you, and your father keeps his promises. I know. Then you need to understand one thing. If you go after this young woman now, it won't just be a conversation. It will be a declaration. And that declaration will have consequences you cannot undo. For you, for her, and for our family." Rashid looked at his mother. "Are you asking me not to go?" Yasmin stood up from the armchair, walked to her son, and placed her hand on his face, a gesture she hadn't made since he was a teenager. "I am asking you to be sure, because if it's real, I will endure any storm by your side. But if it's doubt, it will hurt everyone, especially her." She left the room without waiting for a reply. Rashid stood still, his mother's hand still warm on his face. And there, alone in that enormous room that cost more per night than Marcela earned in a month, he made a decision. He picked up the phone, called his assistant. "Prepare an unmarked car, no official driver. I'll drive myself. Sir, your father. My father doesn't need to know. Not yet." At 4 p.m., a dark, simple car, without any marks indicating who was inside, parked on the dirt road of the neighborhood where Marcela lived. Rashid got out, looked around. The contrast was so great it seemed unreal, from marble and chandeliers to dirt roads and power lines hanging from poles. He walked to the house, indicated by the address, knocked on the rusty iron gate. A woman appeared at the window of the front house, the landlord. "Who are you looking for?" "Marcela Esteves." "Does she live here?" The woman looked at him suspiciously, looked at the car on the street, looked back at him. "She lives in the back room. But she's not here, left this morning and hasn't returned." Rashid thanked her and went back to the car. He sat there, hands on the steering wheel, looking at the rusty gate, and waited. At 5:30, Marcela appeared at the corner. She was walking, her bag on her shoulder, her face tired from a day of walking. When she saw the car parked in front of the house, she slowed her pace. When she saw who got out of the car, she stopped entirely. Rashid stood on the sidewalk, without gala attire, without an assistant, without a gutra, simple clothes, an open face, hands in his pockets. Marcela looked at him, felt her chest tighten in a way she didn't expect. "What are you doing here?" she asked, and her voice held more fear than anger. "I came to apologize." "Apologize for what?" "For everything that happened to you because of me." Marcela took a step back. Not because he was too close, but because this a man like him on her dirt street, apologizing made no sense in any world she knew. "You don't owe me anything," she said. "I lost my job because that's how it works. People like me lose. People like you choose. That's how it is. It doesn't have to be like that, but it is." The silence between them lasted 5 seconds, which felt like 5 minutes. "I know you have no reason to trust me," Rashid said. "And I'm not asking for that. I just want you to know that what happened wasn't fair, and I won't pretend it was." Marcela looked into his eyes, searching for lies, for a game, for any sign that this was just another piece being moved by someone who could move pieces. She found none. But that wasn't enough. "Go away," she said, her voice firm. "If anyone sees you here, I'll lose the little I have left." Rashid nodded, didn't insist, didn't touch her, didn't promise anything, got in the car, and drove away. And Marcela stood there on the sidewalk, her heart pounding so hard she almost didn't hear her phone ring in her pocket. It was Aunt Fatima again, but this time it wasn't a message. It was a call, and when Marcela answered, she heard something that chilled her blood. "Marcela, Gilberto went to the hotel looking for you. They said you were fired." He came back furious. "He's saying he's going to find out what's going on, and if you're involved with some rich guest, he's going to go there and demand what's his." The line went dead. Marcela slowly lowered her phone, because now it wasn't just the hotel, it wasn't just Renata, it wasn't just Nasir. Now it was her own family coming to claim a piece of something that didn't even exist. And the worst part, Gilberto wasn't the type of person who threatened and forgot. Gilberto was the type who would go all the way. Marcela's first day at the bakery began at 6 a.m., and she was already there at 5:45. She arrived in the dark with her bag on her shoulder and a knot in her stomach that wasn't hunger. It was fear, the kind that doesn't scream, that just sits there quietly, squeezing, reminding her that now there was no safety net, no second job, no plan B. If she messed up here, there was nowhere else to fall. The owner explained the routine in 5 minutes and left her with a broom, a dishcloth, and a list of tasks taped to the wall. Sweep the sidewalk, organize the shelves, help at the counter when needed, clean the bathroom twice per shift, close the register at the end. Marcela did everything without asking. Each task was a step on a ladder she had already descended before, at 16, in her first job, when she cleaned the floor of a dental office in exchange for a salary that barely covered her bus fare. She knew the path, she knew the weight. Her body remembered. She was serving the 6th customer of the morning when the glass door opened and the air in the bakery changed. Gilberto entered as if the place belonged to him. He was 30, but looked younger. Not youthful, but irresponsible. The type of person who never matured because there was always someone to clean up their mess. He wore a crumpled t-shirt, shorts, flip-flops, and on his face, a smile Marcela knew very well. The smile of someone who came to get something. "Cousin, it was surprisingly easy to find you." Marcela clenched the dishcloth in her hands. "Gilberto, I'm working." "I know, nice place here." He looked around mockingly, his eyes sweeping over the peeling walls, the noisy fan on the ceiling, the display case with the day's bread. "Big change, huh? From a 5-star hotel to this. What do you want?" Gilberto leaned on the counter, bent forward, lowered his voice, but not enough. "I went to the hotel yesterday. You knew that, right? I went looking for you. And guess what the security guard told me? That you were fired after a dinner with important people, very rich people, foreigners." Marcela didn't answer. She felt her stomach churn. Then I got curious. Gilberto continued with that tone of someone assembling a puzzle in front of the victim. "Because my cousin, who's been cleaning bathrooms since she was 16, suddenly shows up at a millionaire's dinner and then gets fired right after. Doesn't make sense. Unless nothing, Gilberto. I was ordered to go. I went, and I was fired because of it. End of story." "Ordered by whom?" Marcela clenched her jaw. She wouldn't say Rashid's name. Not there, not to him. By the manager. They needed someone to serve. Gilberto stared at her for 3 seconds. He didn't believe her. Marcella saw in his eyes that he didn't believe her, but he didn't press. Not yet. Instead, he changed his tone. Okay, if that's it, that's it. But cousin, things at home are tough. My mom's bills are overdue, and I owe money to a guy who doesn't like to wait. If you could advance. Gilberto, I just got fired. Today is my first day earning minimum wage at the bakery. I don't have any money to advance, and the hotel settlement comes in 10 days, and it already has a destination. My rent. Gilberto straightened up, his smile gone. What remained was not anger, but calculation. That cold look of someone measuring the value of information. Okay, cousin. We'll talk. He left the bakery without saying goodbye. The glass door swung shut behind him. Marcella let out the breath she was holding. Her hands trembled, not from fear of him, but from fear of what he could do with the little he knew. Because Gilberto was the kind of person who turns a piece of truth into an entire lie. If that was for anything, the bakery owner appeared from the kitchen door. Everything all right? Who was that? Nobody, Marcella said. Family. The owner looked at the door, then at her, and went back to the kitchen without commenting, but his look said, family problems at work are work problems. Marcella spent the rest of the day with a heavy heart, serving customers, cleaning tables, organizing stock, doing everything automatically. When the last customer left and she was alone behind the counter, she looked at her reflection in the display glass, dirty apron, hair tied back with an old elastic, dark circles under her eyes, and heard Renata's voice inside her own head. The problem is, this is her best. She closed her eyes. Maybe they were right. The phrase appeared unbidden, soft, poisonous. In that voice that isn't from anyone outside, it's from oneself, the worst voice there is. Maybe this was indeed her place, behind a counter, behind a bucket, behind a service door. Maybe Renata wasn't being cruel. Maybe she was just saying aloud what the whole world thought in whispers. Marcella opened her eyes, looked again at her reflection in the glass, and for a second that lasted too long, she almost believed it. Almost. But then she remembered her mother, not her sick mother, not her mother in the hospital, her mother from before, the mother who came home from work with swollen feet and still sat on the floor to help Marcella with her homework. The mother who said the same thing every night. You are worth more than anything anyone says about you. Don't forget. Marcella gripped the edge of the counter with both hands, took a deep breath, and didn't forget. At the hotel, the situation was different. Rashid had spent the entire morning in his room, refusing coffee, lunch, and 2 meetings with family representatives. Nasir sent his assistant to knock on the door 3 times. On the 3rd, Rashid opened. Tell my father I'll come down when I'm ready. The door closed. Rashid sat back on the edge of the bed. His phone was open on a search screen. He had asked the assistant for Marcella's full name, her address, her phone number. The assistant brought everything, but also a warning. Sir, any contact with this employee right now could be interpreted as provocation by the families. Your father is already at his limit. Rashid knew. He knew that every step in that direction was a step against everything his father had built. And he knew that Marcella hadn't asked for any of this. She asked for nothing, and still lost everything. That's what he couldn't get out of his head. At 2 p.m., Nasir entered the suite without knocking. This time he didn't come with coldness. He came with a different weapon. He came with weariness. He came as a father. My son. His voice was low, almost soft. I know what you're feeling. I was young once. I looked at someone and thought the world had stopped. But the world doesn't stop, Rashid. The world collects its debts. And if you don't pay the right price, it collects from those you love. Rashid remained silent. The Duval family offered the best proposal, Nasir continued. Lands, ports, access to the American market. Renata is intelligent, prepared, comes from a family that understands our world. You don't need to love her now. Love comes later. It came for me. It can come for you. Rashid looked at his father and saw something he had never seen before. Nasir, being sincere, not manipulating, not ordering, truly asking this hurt more than any command. Give me until tomorrow, Rashid said. Nasir nodded, stood up, and at the door, he paused. The assistant will prepare the terms of the alliance with the Duvals. If by tomorrow morning you don't have a concrete objection, I will sign. He left. Rashid was left alone. The room seemed smaller, the walls seemed closer, the air seemed heavier. He picked up the phone, called his assistant. Prepare the terms. On the other end of the line, silence. Sir? I said to prepare the terms of the alliance with the Duval family. Yes, sir. He hung up. He looked at the phone in his hand as if he had just signed a sentence. because that was exactly how he felt. He wasn't choosing Renata, he was giving up Marcela, and he knew, with every fiber of his being, that these were very different things, but the pressure was too great. The weight of the name, the family, the legacy, the expectations, all of it pushing him down a path that made sense on paper and destroyed everything inside. He lay on the bed, staring at the ceiling, and for the first time since arriving in the States, Rashid Al-Farsi felt truly alone. At 9 p.m., Marcela arrived home. Her feet ached, her back too. She heated up the leftover rice from the previous day and sat on her bed to eat. Her phone had 4 messages, 2 from Aunt Fatima, 1 from an unknown number, and 1 from Gilberto. She opened Gilberto's first, and when she read it, the plate almost fell from her hand. "Cousin, I found out some things about that Sheikh at the hotel. Looks like he's choosing a bride from among some rich girls. And some people are saying he took an interest in an employee. Imagine if the journalists found out about this story. It would make a good piece. Do you think anyone would pay for information like that?" Marcela read it 3 times. The first time, she didn't believe it. The second, she felt her stomach drop. The third, she understood. Gilberto wasn't threatening out of anger. He was threatening for money. He wanted to sell the story, and if he did that, he wouldn't just destroy her. He would destroy Rashid too. Marcela put the plate on the bed, looked at the ceiling, looked at her phone, looked at her own hands that still smelled of flour and disinfectant, and understood that she was trapped. If she sought Rashid to warn him, it would confirm everything Gilberto suspected. If she did nothing, Gilberto would go ahead alone. If she paid him, she had no money. If she reported him, it was her word against her cousins, and Aunt Fatima would side with her son, as she always did. 4 paths, none without pain. And there, sitting on that twin bed, in a room that fit her entire life in 2 square meters, Marcela felt for the first time that perhaps it would have been better to remain invisible, because when no one sees you, no one can reach you. But now it was too late to disappear. At the hotel, in the dark of the presidential suite, Rashid lay awake. The terms of the alliance with the Duvals were on the bedside table, ready. Only his signature was missing. He reached out, picked up the pen, pulled the document closer, opened to the last page. The dotted line waited. He touched the tip of the pen to the paper and stopped, because he saw in his mind those dark eyes that didn't waver. That woman on her knees who stood up without asking for help. That firm voice saying, "Go away on the dirt sidewalk," not out of pride, but to protect him. She told him to go away to protect him. Rashid lifted the pen from the paper, placed the document back on the table, and stared at the ceiling of the room that cost more per night than Marcela earned in 2 months. He didn't sign, but he also didn't know what he would do when the sun rose. Rashid woke up with the alliance terms still on the bedside table. The pen was beside it. The document opened to the last page. The dotted line empty, everything exactly as he had left it the night before, like an unbandaged wound. He lay staring at that paper for almost a minute. He thought of his father, of his tired voice saying, "Love comes later." He thought of Renata, her calculated smile, the lands, the ports, the perfect alliance on paper. He thought of everything that made sense. And then he thought of Marcela, saying, "Go away on a dirt sidewalk," and nothing else made sense. He got up, showered, dressed, picked up the document, folded it in half, and put it in his jacket pocket. Not to sign, but to remember the weight of what he was carrying. He went down for breakfast. The restaurant ballroom was almost empty. Only Nasir at the head of a table with a cup of coffee and an open newspaper. When he saw his son, he didn't smile, but he also didn't attack. He merely looked and waited. Rashid sat in front of him. "Good morning, father. Good morning. Did you sleep?" "No." Nasir slowly folded his newspaper. "Neither did I." The silence between them lasted almost 30 seconds. It wasn't a quarrel. It was something worse. It was that kind of silence that appears when 2 people who love each other know they are about to hurt each other. "The dinner is tonight," Nasir said. "The terms are ready." Rashid touched his jacket pocket where the folded document was. "They're with me." Nasir nodded. He didn't ask if he had signed. Perhaps because he didn't want to hear the answer. Perhaps because deep down, he already knew. "Tonight, Rashid, tonight everything will be resolved." He stood up and left the restaurant. His coffee remained half-finished on the table. Rashid sat there alone, with the clatter of cutlery and voices around him, and made a decision that would change everything, but not the one his father expected. He picked up the phone, didn't call his assistant, called his mother. "I need help. Across town." Marcela didn't reply to Gilberto's message. She stayed awake all night, staring at her phone screen. as if the words would change by themselves. But they didn't. The threat remained there, clear, written in the tone of someone who knows they have a knife and is just deciding where to use it. When the sun rose, she made a decision. She wouldn't look for Rashid. She wouldn't pay Gilberto. She wouldn't run. She would do the only thing she had known how to do since she was 14. Get up, go to work, and endure whatever came. She arrived at the bakery at 6 sharp. The owner was already there, turning on the oven. Marcela put on her apron, tied her hair back, and began cleaning the tables. Her body moved automatically, but her mind was in 4 places at once. At the hotel, in her room, on Gilberto's message, and in those eyes that had appeared on her dirt street, apologizing. At 9 a.m., her phone vibrated in her apron pocket, unknown number. Marcela looked, hesitated, answered. Marcela Esteves? The voice was feminine, calm, with a slight accent she couldn't identify at first. This is she. My name is Yasmin. I am Rashid Al-Farsi's mother. I need to speak with you personally. The floor disappeared again. Marcela clutched the phone tightly to keep her hand from trembling. How did you get my number, ma'am? The same way my son got your address. But I'm not calling to cause trouble. I'm calling because, if I don't speak with you today, the problem that already exists will become too big for any of us to solve. Silence. 5 seconds. 6. 7. There's a pastry shop called Dona Flores on the street behind Central Park. Would noon work for you? Marcela asked the owner to leave 15 minutes early for lunch. He grumbled, but agreed. At 11:50, she entered Dona Flores' pastry shop. A small, simple place. Wooden tables and checkered tablecloths. The smell of fresh coffee and corn cake. No chandeliers, no marble. Yasmin was already there. Back table, near the window, a cup of tea in her hands. Discreet clothing, hair pulled back, no jewelry, but a presence impossible to ignore. The kind of woman who doesn't need to raise her voice to be heard. Marcela approached, sat down, and the two looked at each other, and Yasmin did something Marcela didn't expect. She smiled, not out of pity, not out of politeness. It was a smile of recognition, as if personally confirming something she had already imagined from afar. Thank you for coming, Yasmin said in English. Her accent was soft, almost musical. You speak English, ma'am? I lived in the States when I was young, 2 years in New York City before I married. My husband doesn't know, or pretends not to know. With Nasir, one is never sure. Marcela didn't expect that. She expected nothing from that conversation. Why did you want to speak with me? She asked directly. Yasmin placed her cup on the table. Slowly, carefully. Because my son called me this morning asking for help. And Rashid doesn't ask for help. He never has. Not even as a child when he fell. He would cry. He always picked himself up alone. But this morning he called me, and his voice was different. He was afraid. Not of losing his name, not of losing his legacy, but afraid of losing you. Marcela felt her chest tighten. You know that last night he ordered the terms of the alliance with Renata to be prepared? Yasmin nodded slowly. I know, and I know he didn't sign. He spent the entire night with the pen in his hand, and couldn't, because his body obeys duty. But something inside him has already chosen, and that something is stronger than any contract. You don't know me. I don't need to know all of you to see what matters. I saw what you did when you were humiliated at the dinner. I saw you leave in silence. I saw that you didn't beg, didn't make a scene, didn't ask for anything. And when my son went to your house to apologize, you sent him away. Not out of pride, to protect him. A woman who protects someone who could destroy her doesn't need a resume to prove who she is. Marcela felt her eyes burn, pressed her lips together, held it in. But there's one thing you need to know, ma'am, Marcela said, and her voice trembled for the first time. My cousin found out what happened. He wants to sell the story to newspapers, magazines, anyone who pays. If he does that, he doesn't just destroy me. He destroys your son too. Yasmin didn't move, didn't widen her eyes, didn't panic. She just listened, processed, and replied with a calmness. Marcela didn't understand where it came from. Thank you for telling me. That confirms what I already suspected. That you are more concerned with my son than with yourself. And that is exactly why I am here. Yasmin leaned forward. Her voice lowered but grew firmer. Marcela, I need to tell you 2 things. The first is about me. The second is about the Duval family. Marcela waited. When Nasir chose me, Yasmin said, her eyes shining but her voice firm, I wasn't the daughter of anyone important. My father was a teacher. My mother sewed for others. His family didn't accept me. They did everything to get rid of me. In the first 2 years of marriage, I ate alone. I slept in a separate room when we had visitors. and his sisters talked about me as if I were a mistake the heir had made. Marcella felt a tear stream down. She hadn't expected that. She hadn't expected that woman, firm, elegant, wife of one of the most powerful men in the world, carried a story that echoed so much of her own. "And what changed?" she asked, her voice almost failing. Nasir didn't give up. It took time. It cost things we never recovered, but he stood by his choice until the world could no longer deny it. And that's what I see in Rashid now. The same look, the same stubbornness. Yasmin placed her hand over Marcella's. "I'm not asking you to accept anything. I'm asking you not to give up before knowing the truth. Because I almost gave up, and if I had, I wouldn't have had my son." Marcella pressed her lips together, held on with all her might. "Now for the second thing," Yasmin said, removing her hand and picking up her cup. "Nasir is about to finalize the alliance with the Duval family. Renata's father offered lands and ports. But what no one knows, not Nasir, not Renata, not her father, is that I've spent the last 2 days talking to our lawyers and discovered that the Duval family has enormous hidden debt. Mortgaged lands, overdue contracts, lawsuits running in secret. An alliance Nasir thinks will strengthen the family will actually destroy it." Marcella blinked. "And why are you telling me this, ma'am?" "Because tonight I'm going to tell Nasir in front of everyone. And when I do that, Renata's house of cards falls, and my son will have the chance to make his choice without anyone saying it was a whim. But that chance is only worth something if he has something to fight for." Yasmin looked deep into Marcella's eyes. "And that, my daughter, does not depend on me. It depends on you." She stood up, left a bill on the table, looked at Marcella one last time. "As for your cousin, don't worry. He can try to sell whatever he wants. But when Rashid makes his choice public, of his own free will, there will be no secret to sell. You take away the power of those who threaten when the truth comes from your mouth before it comes from theirs." She left the pastry shop as she had entered, without noise, without drama, without looking back. Marcella stayed there for another 20 minutes. Yasmin's cup still warm on the table, the street noise coming through the window. Her phone vibrated. "Gilberto, last chance, cousin. Until 6 p.m. I'll wait. After that, I call whoever pays the most." Marcella read the message, placed her phone on the table, looked out the window, and for the first time in many years, she didn't feel fear. She felt anger. Not the anger that screams, but the anger that decides. She picked up her phone, opened the conversation with Gilberto, and typed a message she had never dared to send. "Do whatever you want, Gilberto, but know one thing. I owe you nothing. Never did. And from today on, I will never pretend I do again." She sent it, turned off her phone, stood up from the chair, with her heart beating differently, not faster, but stronger, because Marcella had just done something she hadn't done since she was 14. She had chosen herself. And now less than 6 hours remained until the closing dinner at the Sterling Grand Hotel. The dinner where Nasir would force an alliance, where Yasmin would reveal the truth about the Duvals, where Rashid would make his choice in front of everyone, and where Marcella, if she had the courage, could appear not as a cleaner, not as a guest, not as a candidate as herself. The question was, would she? At 37 middags, the Sterling Grand Hotel lit up all the chandeliers in the main ballroom. Tables with white tablecloths, golden cutlery, crystal glasses, arches of red roses at the entrance, silent waiters, musicians tuning in the corner, everything in place, everything perfect, everything fake. Because beneath all that beauty, everyone who entered that ballroom carried a bomb, and none knew the others did too. Nasir Al-Farsi entered first. Dark suit, the posture of one who commands without asking. Beside him, the legal advisor with a briefcase containing the terms of the alliance with the Duval family. In Nasir's mind, that night would end with a handshake and a signed contract. Simple as that. Renata arrived soon after with her father. The usual red dress. The smile of someone who already feels like a winner. She greeted Nasir with a perfect curtsy, greeted the other candidates with kisses on the cheek that meant nothing, and sat at the main table like someone sitting on a throne that was already hers. Camila Braganza was beside her, as always, a loyal shadow. The other two candidates took their places in silence. Their parents had already realized the Duval alliance was progressing. They were there more out of politeness than hope. Rashid was the last to descend. When he appeared at the ballroom entrance, all eyes turned. Formal attire, white gutra, dark shoes, everything impeccable. But anyone who looked closely would notice that his shoulders were different, not slumped, not tense, but resolute. It was the posture of someone who already knew what they were going to do and was waiting for the right moment. In his jacket pocket, the folded document with the empty dotted line. Yasmin was at a side table with a cup of tea she hadn't touched. The lawyer's brief in her lap, observing everything with that gaze that missed nothing. The dinner began. Appetizer, main course, polite conversation. Nasir conducted the table, directing topics to alliances, business, the future. Renata's father agreed with everything, added numbers, mentioned ports and roads, like someone dealing cards from a deck only he knew was marked. Rashid ate in silence, answered when asked, smiled when necessary, but his eyes occasionally drifted to the ballroom door. No one appeared. At 9 sharp, Nasir stood up, tapped his glass lightly with a spoon. The ballroom fell silent. I want to thank all the families present. This week has been one of rapprochement, of getting to know each other, of building. And today, at this closing dinner, I would like to formalize the alliance that I believe to be the strongest among all those presented. Renata straightened her posture. Her father broke into a wide smile. The Duval family presented a solid proposal, with access to lands, ports, and connections that complement the Al-Farsi family's interests in the United States. And therefore, it is with satisfaction that Nasir. The voice came from the side. Calm, firm, unhurried. Yasmin was standing. The entire ballroom turned. Nasir looked at his wife with surprise and warning at the same time. Yasmin was unfazed. She walked to the center of the ballroom with the brief in her hand. Before formalizing any alliance, I think everyone in this room deserves to know the truth about what is being offered. Renata frowned. Her father uncrossed his arms. Yasmin opened the brief, took out the documents, and spoke with the clarity of someone who had memorized every line. The Duval family lists 7 rural properties in their proposal. 4 are mortgaged. 2 have secret debt enforcement processes pending. The 3rd was used as collateral for an overdue loan from 14 months ago. The mentioned ports do not belong to the family. They are temporary usage contracts that expire in less than 2 years, with no guarantee of renewal. The silence in the ballroom became a solid thing. You could almost touch it. Renata looked at her father. His confident tan had turned gray. This is ridiculous, he said, standing up. This woman has no authority to. I have the documents, Yasmin cut in. Certificates, records, statements, all stamped and signed. If you wish to contest, you can call your lawyer now. The man opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. Nothing came out. Renata stood up. This is a setup. You're doing this too. To protect my family, Yasmin said, looking her in the eye, which is what a mother does. Nasir took the documents, read the first page, the second, the third. With each page, his jaw clenched tighter. When he finished, he placed the papers on the table and looked at Renata's father with a look that needed no translation. Did you try to deceive my family? It wasn't a question. The man recoiled. Renata grabbed her father's arm. Camila had already moved 2 steps away. Nasir, I can explain. No, you cannot. He turned his back on the man and faced the ballroom. The alliance with the Duval family is terminated. Renata felt the floor disappear. She looked around, seeking support. The other candidates averted their gaze. Their parents did too. In 10 seconds, she went from favorite to embarrassment. Nasir took a deep breath, adjusted his suit jacket, and turned to his son. Rashid, do you have the terms? The entire ballroom looked at Rashid. He put his hand in his jacket pocket, took out the folded document, placed it on the table before his father, the dotted line empty, visible to anyone who wished to see. They are here. Unsigned. Nasir looked at the document, looked at his son. His jaw clenched again. Then, sign now. We have other candidates. Choose one. The silence fell like an anvil. Rashid looked at his father, looked at the document, looked at the remaining candidates. 2 women he barely knew, sitting in silence, waiting for a name they didn't want to hear. He looked at the empty ballroom door. Nasir took a step towards his son. His voice lowered, but everyone heard. Rashid, I'm waiting. Rashid picked up the pen. The same pen from the night before. The same one he had touched to the paper and stopped. His fingers closed around the pen. The entire ballroom held its breath. Renata, still standing near the table, her face devastated, watched like someone seeing an accident in slow motion. Camila clutched her purse as if it were a shield. The waiters had stopped serving. The musicians had stopped playing. Rashid looked at the paper, the dotted line, the empty space where his name would fit, and looked at his father one last time. Father, I respect you more than anyone in this world. And I know what you have built. I know what this family means. I know the weight of our name. Nasir didn't move. But I will not put my name on a paper to marry someone I have not chosen. Not because I disrespect tradition, but because the tradition you taught me was different. You taught me that a real man keeps his word. And my word, father, my word has already been given. Nasir clenched his jaw. His eyes shone, not with anger, but with something he didn't want to show. And to whom was that word given, Rashid? Rashid opened his mouth to answer, and that's when the ballroom door opened. Marcella entered, not in uniform, not in a borrowed dark dress. She was wearing the best clothes she had. Simple, clean, pressed, dignified, without jewelry, without heels, without heavy makeup. She was herself, trembling inside, firm outside. The entire ballroom looked. Murmurs began. Renata, still standing, recognized her instantly, and her reaction was automatic. The last blow from someone who has already lost. The cleaner is back. Her voice came out loud, cutting, desperate. Can someone get this woman out of here? She stays. Rashid didn't shout. He didn't need to. The two words crossed the ballroom like a straight line no one could cut. He walked to the center, stopped 2 steps from Marcella, and spoke, looking at her, loud enough for everyone there to hear. This woman was humiliated in this ballroom, was fired because of me, lost her job, lost her stability, and asked for nothing in return. When I went to her to ask for forgiveness, she sent me away. Not out of pride, but to protect me, because the last thing she wanted was for me to lose anything because of her. He turned to his father. I am not choosing her because she is beautiful. I am not choosing her because she is convenient. I am choosing her because in the middle of a ballroom full of people pretending, she was the only real person. And if the price of being with her is to lose all of this. He looked at the chandeliers, at the tables, at the gold around them. Then I will pay. Silence. The kind of silence that has weight, that presses on the chest, that makes people swallow hard at the same time. Marcella felt the tears come, but she didn't hold them back. Not this time. One streamed down her face. Then another. Silent, clean, without a sob, the tears of someone who can finally cry without anyone using it against her. Nasir stood still, looking at his son, looking at Marcella, his jaw hard, his eyes shining. And then he looked at Yasmin. His wife stood a few steps away, her hands clasped in front of her body, her eyes wet, and Nasir saw in her face, in her posture, in her quiet strength. The same woman he had chosen 30 years ago against everyone's will, the teacher's daughter, the girl who ate alone, the woman he almost lost because the world said she wasn't enough. And he understood. He walked to Marcella, stopped before her, and looked her in the eyes. Nasir al-Farsi, he said, his voice thick, serious, but without coldness, Rashid's father, and a man who almost made a mistake he should have already learned not to make. He extended his hand. Marcella looked at his hand, looked at his face, and shook it firmly, without lowering her eyes. Yasmin, behind him, let out the breath she had been holding, the tears she had been holding back since the pastry shop finally fell. Renata pulled her father by the arm and exited through the side door. She didn't even look back. Camila followed, her steps quick, like someone fleeing before the ceiling falls. The other candidates and their families bid farewell with nods, understanding that this night was no longer theirs. And it was at that moment that Gilberto appeared at the entrance door. Cell phone in hand, the face of someone who thinks they have something to sell. He walked past the security guard, speaking loudly. I know who the woman the Sheikh chose is. I have the whole story. Who here wants it? He stopped. Because he saw Marcella standing in the center of the ballroom beside Rashid, with Nasir in front and Yasmin beside them. And he understood that the story he wanted to sell had already been told aloud in front of everyone, by the one who had the right to tell it. He stood still in the doorway, his phone raised, his smile dying on his face. Behind him, Aunt Fatima, who had come along, had come to collect, had come to claim the piece she thought was hers. But when she saw her niece, the same one she had, called a burden, an obligation, a failure standing in the center of that ballroom, being looked at with respect by people, Aunt Fatima never dreamed existed. Something broke inside her. Not anger, but shame, the kind that can't be quickly fixed, that can't be resolved with apologies, that clings to you like a shadow. Marcella looked at her aunt, looked at Gilberto. She didn't shout, didn't cry, didn't demand, she just looked. And that gaze, firm, clear, without hatred, but without forgiveness, was the worst thing Aunt Fatima had ever felt. Because it was the gaze of someone who had moved on without her, and wouldn't be coming back. Gilberto lowered his phone, pulled his mother by the arm, and they left in silence, smaller than when they entered. In the corner of the ballroom, near the service door, Mr. Borges watched everything, standing, his tie crooked, his face pale. The woman he had fired to protect himself was being received by the most powerful family in that hotel. He swallowed hard, turned his back, and left without saying anything, because he had nothing to say. He would have to live with that in silence for the rest of his career. The ballroom became almost empty. Only Rashid, Marcella, Nasir, Yasmin, and a few employees who pretended to arrange tables but didn't miss a word. Rashid looked at Marcella. "I don't know what will happen from now on," she said in a low, unadorned voice. "Neither do I. It will be difficult. The world you come from wasn't made for people like me. And I know there are people in your family who will never accept it. I know I will hear things. I know they will look at me as they looked at your mother in the beginning. And I know there will be nights when I will want to give up." Rashid didn't avert his gaze. "And will you give up?" Marcella looked at him. Looked at Yasmin, who held Nasir's hand a few steps away. Looked at the ballroom, at the same marble floor where she had knelt, drying dirty water while the world laughed. "No," she said. "I endured worse things alone. Accompanied. I can endure whatever comes." Rashid extended his hand. Marcella looked, took a deep breath, and held it. Not like a fairy tale princess, but like a woman who had walked through fire and decided not to burn. Yasmin looked at the scene, then looked at Nasir and said softly, only for him to hear, "Looks familiar, doesn't it?" Nasir didn't reply, but he squeezed his wife's hand slowly, firmly, like someone apologizing for 30 years without needing words. Outside, the night was dark, and the wind rattled the hotel windows. Inside the ballroom, the chandelier still shone, but most of the tables were already empty. The red flowers on the arches had begun to shed their petals. Marcella looked at her hand in Rashid's and thought of her mother, of her voice, saying every night, "You are worth more than anything anyone says about you." Now she knew it was true. Not because a rich man had chosen her, not because the ballroom had fallen silent, not because her rival fell or her aunt felt shame, but because she herself, after everything, after every bucket, every laugh, every lonely night, every "it's your fault," was still standing. And to be standing, after everything they had tried to do to bring her down, was already the greatest victory anyone could have. The ballroom that had laughed was now silent. But this time the silence was not of humiliation, it was of respect. And outside, a red petal detached from the arch of the door and slowly fell to the marble floor. No one stepped on it.